Okay. It is 2:01. Are we waiting for anyone else?
No, Heidi Reed is with us and she'll be.
Terrific.
We didn't have a printed list of topics today.
I do not.
I don't either. Debbie, did you have those? Just keeps us in order.
Yeah. Busy up here. Do you need one?
Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Jody over here.
Jody's right
Is
there.
here.
Oh, she's.
Hello,
I'm on today. Hello, Jody. I was looking up there for Jody.
She's live and in person.
Okay. I see we have Heidi. Shall we jump in? Are we ready? Okay.
Are we good on civic work?
All right. Well, we'll call this meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. This is the Tillamook County Commissioners Weekly Board Briefing. And at the top of our list of topics is the Hebo Joint Water Sanitary Authority. And we have Heidi Reed with us. And shall I turn the floor over to Heidi, or do you want to start?
I'll just say something quickly
Okay.
and then Heidi has
Okay.
most of the information, but yeah, we received last Friday a notification from Heidi, and you may recognize Heidi from the
Yes. we do.
Beaver Water District. And in prepping for this topic, funny enough, I found old correspondence regarding the same topic with the Cloverdale, one of the Cloverdale districts, and it was correspondence with Heidi. So she's
Okay.
done this a few times. But we were notified by Heidi last week as a representative of the Hebo Joint Water Sanitary Authority that they no longer have a quorum or governing body for the district. And so what that means by statute is the Board of Commissioners needs to step in and assist with appointment by board order for new members because they don't have a quorum to do so. So Heidi may have an update on where they are today, but turn it over to her.
Hi, Heidi. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon again. So I found out Friday that I don't have a quorum. I had 3 of my board members resign, which was surprising to me, but it happened. And so I'm just kind of reaching out. In the meantime, the 2 board members that I have remaining have found an additional person from the community who said he would step up and join the board. But that's going to require for you guys to help me out with that at this point, because right now I don't have a governing body and they don't have anybody to vote him on. And his name is Joe Ely from the community of Cloverdale. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at this point.
And who are your other board members?
I currently have Donna Lane and Dwayne Dinan are the 2 remaining board members.
What about Gordon Whitehead? Did he actually, was he one of the ones who resigned?
Yes, sir, he was. He was one of the ones that resigned. Him, Bob Petruska, and Carrie Wondrum all resigned within just a few minutes of each other.
Okay. Okay, so the process will be that we would presumably appoint Joe Ely, or walk me through the process. Does Joe need to apply? How has this been done in the past?
So in the past, basically in my other district, when this happened in Cloverdale, we just gave you guys a list of names, and you were able to appoint those individuals, and then they came onto the board and served out the current term for the people that they were replacing, and then they went on the ballot during the next term to actually be voted in by the public.
Okay, all right. That sounds good. So if I assume you're vetting board members, so if you are confident, if you feel good about Joe Ely, will you just send us that and we'll get it on our agenda?
Yes, I can absolutely do that.
Okay, terrific. Do we have any additional responsibility, or is there some other way we can help?
I think right now, as long as we can get him on the board, I'm concerned because in the month of May, it was supposed to be our budget committee, and everything else going on for budget. So my main concern is just getting a governing body in there that, we can keep doing business and moving forward.
So it's a simple board order appointment. So if you could just send me his name, so I have the spelling correctly, Heidi, we could have it on the agenda Friday and you could approve next week.
Terrific. Okay.
So you can have a board next week, Heidi.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. Yep, that sounds good. So let us know if there's anything else we can do for you. We'll take this up at our board meeting next week.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I talk about the bigger picture a little bit?
Please.
Thank you. Okay, you will, Heidi, you might as well stay on.
Okay.
You'll be receiving an invitation, maybe later this week. I'm not just sure where we are in getting all the names and numbers together, but for my part on the commission, having had some background on Pacific City, JWSA and water district some years ago, I'm pulling together all the smaller districts in the county from north to south, and I think they're about 15 or 18 or something like that, water and sewer. And we'll meet at the library for probably a couple hours, like 2 to 4, sometime next week, possibly the week after, depending on logistics and getting the room and all that. And we'll talk about some of these issues, including the inability to sustain a quorum. There's other issues with respect to maybe water quality and quantity in particular. There's other issues about unmet capital needs and cash flow and a whole variety of things. And as you well know, that falls to the county if there's an issue. And as you know as well, Beaver had a problem there with their auditing and not reporting in a timely fashion. So I want to identify as many of those issues as we can, and then sit around and talk to the people about what might be some solutions. And I've arranged for 2 people. One, a gentleman named Frank Stratton, and maybe one of his key people. He's the current head of the Special Districts Association of Oregon.
Yes.
And you probably met him along the line. He will be there, or I think next week he's out of town, but in any event, he will send one of the key people from SDAO. And then we'll also have our water special person from the health department at the county. And she's currently, I think, out of the area, but she'll be back in time. And I've communicated with Marlene at the health department, so she will see that she's there. So I want to put all these smart people in a room and talk about this for a while and see if there's a way to consolidate or to share resources. Or in other words, if you needed a backhoe and you didn't have one, maybe one could be taken up from Pacific City or one of the other districts, and vice versa. And if you're having trouble getting auditors, then maybe you can share information. And it's been my experience that not a lot of sharing goes on, and maybe I'm mistaken, but it could be more. And there's sort of a critical mass on these small districts, and so many are so small, like Hebo. You don't really reach that mass, and if you lose 2 or 3 people, then you've got a problem that we just talked about. So sometime you'll be getting an invitation, and it would sure be helpful if you can make it, because you've got some good history as well. And so we'll just make a long list and then figure out a way forward. We may end up with a couple more meetings, but I think we can solve some of our own problems, and maybe we have to look elsewhere. But the only way we're going to solve them at all, I think, is if we start talking.
Right.
So,
And I agree. Yeah.
So good. Well, thank you for that. And we'll expect you to be there, and we might even have a bottle of water for you or something. I don't know. But it'll be a productive afternoon, I hope. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Heidi. Thanks for all your work.
I'm hanging in there.
It sounds like you
You're
are
holding it all
all
together
over
right
the
now.
I'm
place.
Yeah.
trying. I appreciate you guys for helping me out.
You bet.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the subject of water right now? Okay.
No, I think for now, water is good.
All right. Well, let's move on to a TLT conversation. Lisa, are you going to lead us off on that?
Yeah.
We invite Sarah and Tommy up.
Yep. So I gave you an updated handout of the handout I provided last time. Tommy has an updated numbers handout. I'll have him start with the numbers and then we'll go into my updated sheet.
We'll go ahead and share this.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
And if I might add, after going back and forth several times, I found a clear answer to whether you had to go out for a vote, and you do.
And it's a
Okay.
clear answer. How?
That was, it was so clear that it was like, how could I have missed it to begin with? But it's there. So anyway.
Okay.
Good to have clarity.
That is strictly what the law provides, clarity. Yeah, it was a little bit.
My turn. Good afternoon. Tom Stiber, Division of Community, Department of Community Development, Division of Transient Lodging Tax.
Division of one, right?
Yes, one or the other. We have a little more information in trying to come up with a way to set a baseline for looking ahead, a baseline on which to base forecasted increases. So we'll try to make it as clear as we can. The first slide that we had a little bit of discussion last time about the relationship between the county and the city lodging taxes. They do work together, and I'm sure that I wasn't here in the first go around, but when that was all set up, I'm sure the cities were involved in that discussion as well. So the way that it was established back in 2013 and 2014, and we're still with that same system, is that the county has a rate, TLT rate of 10%, and the cities can keep 9% of that in their TLT program. So that means that the county retains 1% of the TLT tax on incorporated properties. So any more questions about that? Tommy, do we get the 10% and then give them the 9%? No, they collect their own. Okay. And then the 1%? We collect the 1%. From, does the city remit it to us? No, we collect the 1% and they collect the 9%. Okay. Thank you. Or 10%, whichever they have. Okay. Mm-hmm.
What is the percentage of TLT that comes from the cities, Tommy?
The percentage of the total TLT that we get from the cities is about 7%. So it's not, and it's interesting because when you look at the total sales, lodging sales, they're about equal, but because of the different tax rates, there's some to about 7% of the total TLT revenue.
When we started this, and several of us were involved back then, the cities did not all have 9. There were some, I think, that were 6 and 5 or even somewhere in there. But as soon as the 10 was put in place and effective on January 1 of 2014, then the cities didn't take them too long to come up to the 9, as I recall. So, it's exactly where it is today. But there was a point there when the county actually got a little bit larger share of that until the cities figured out, hey, we can come up and it'll all work.
It was just a few months that
Yes.
they caught up.
I remember it happened literally in a matter of months, or as soon as they could get an ordinance put together.
Yep. I think the last one was maybe 2 years into the county program, and then they caught up, which I anticipate would be about the same if we do an increase again.
My
And-
guess is they've learned their lesson, yes.
And we would change our ordinance if we did an increase. Let's pretend we went to 15%. I'm not saying we are for any listeners. I'm just using it because it's a round number. We would then allow them to keep up to 14 so that we netted that 1%. Is that correct? It would be a change in ordinance of what they're allowed
That
to
would be
keep.
the county's choice, but
Right.
that would probably be appropriate.
Yeah, because we don't say they keep 1%, or we don't say we get 1%, we say they keep 9%. So the ordinance would just have to change if our intention was to keep 1%.
Right.
Okay, that was, I think, what got confusing last time, was the 9%. It kept saying, well, they're gonna come up, but if our ordinance only allows them to have 9%, it doesn't matter if they come up. Right?
That's correct.
Unless we change the ordinance, because the ordinance is
Right.
currently based on the 9%, not the 1%.
Right.
And it's my understanding that essentially with or without our order, because they have home rule, they can establish whatever TLT percentage they want. But their obligation, as far as we know, is to still, for those properties within city limits, they still give us 1%.
Where'd that obligation come from? Because it's the 9% that drives that. So I think there's, from my perspective, there's still the obligation would be bigger than that if we don't move the 9%.
The 1% specified.
Okay, not the 9%, where it says they're allowed, the ordinance says city, this is where we got last time, I think, in this circle, is does the ordinance say they keep 9% or does the ordinance say we get 1%? Because that's, it,
Says up to a 9% credit.
so if we kept that at that, we would get the difference between 9 and 15.
That's correct.
Okay, now I'm not saying we would. I think we work in partnership with our cities. It's fine. I just want us to all be clear going in. Yes,
And I believe it's my understanding that several of our cities are doing their own homework now, understanding that the county is considering an increase. And that under home rule, they are now figuring out the relevance of that 9%. It may have been what was established at the time in partnership with the cities.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they will have input and feedback first.
Yeah.
As we move along.
okay, thank you. Just clarifying the 9 and 1, because in my brain that was like, which is the important number?
Yes. Okay, anything else on page 1? Okay, page 2, this is the same chart that we had last time. And we can use this as maybe a basis for determining or deciding what years we'd like to use as a baseline. So we developed 3 options. The first is based on the last 6 years. As you can see, we'd have the last 3 that are a little lower and the last 2 years are higher, but would average out those 6 years. The second option would be the last 4 years. And the third option would be an average of the last 3 years. Okay on that one?
Mhm.
Okay, page 3. Mhm. We had some discussion last time, I think Commissioner Scar asked specifically about the quarter returns and how they compare. So this chart shows a little bit of how the quarters compare from year to year. We can see that the 3 lower quarters actually decreased a little in the last 2 years. But the third quarter, July through September quarter, stayed about the same. So overall, it declined just slightly. He also asked about what we knew about the first quarter of this year. We don't know too much yet because not all the returns are in, but I did see one thing that was interesting. The Airbnb return did come in this week. And it was, and it's funny because their Airbnb return is always strong in the first quarter, which is the low season. I'm not sure why that is, but this first quarter this year was the highest ever for a first quarter return for Airbnb. So that may be an indication that the returns are going to remain strong.
We can hope so.
Airbnb makes up about 30% of our total revenue, so.
And if I can add, for a while, they didn't want to give us anything.
Yeah.
Any revenue or information?
Yeah, they didn't think they didn't think our tax applied to them.
Oh,
Fascinating.
So
That's
Tommy and I wrestled with them, and other people were wrestling with them too.
Well,
And you
and they
won.
didn't even start
Huh?
until 2017 is when they actually started. And so there were, and of course, we collected it from the owners before that, but
Mhm.
it took them 3 years before they came around. And then the VRBO was actually a little later than that, in 2018, so. And they still don't all participate in that. And in that case, the owners collect the tax.
Yeah.
But, so it's an evolving program for sure. A lot of litigation across the country with those companies. So it'll probably continue to change. We're hoping to get more visibility on their returns. They don't, they give us
Right.
almost no information. So another thing that we're working on. All right, anything anything else on slide 3, page 3? Okay, page 4. This one will blind you, but put some coloring in to maybe help see what's going on here. It's 3 sections, you can see, and those 3 sections are the 3 baselines options that we talked about. So the top one is the 6-year baseline and so on. The blue line, it shows the 7% that we get from the cities. So you can see that it's a fairly minor part of the total. Then the green line, I'm sorry, just above the green line is the current amount that of the discretion of the 30% fund that we give to roads, public works to maintain roads. And so what we're talking about is, you can see that amount is the same all the way across. We're talking about holding them to that amount and then using the addition that we get for other things.
Isn't that 30% net of what your office takes?
That's the total
Total? Okay.
of the 30%.
But what he's saying is that the 30% number doesn't all go.
Goes to roads after admin expenses.
No, I understand that, but so like the number here, then the 1.797 is the gross amount, and from that, before it goes to roads, your office comes out of that.
Correct.
Right, okay, got it, thank you.
Correct. Mhm. So then on the green line shows the amount that we could expect to increase in the 30% funds that would be available for other uses.
And just for a point of clarification, this is assuming that there are no major shifts in the short-term rental program, right? Because the majority of the transient lodging tax collected comes from short-term rentals.
And we're looking at the 7% total being a rather small part. To maybe simplify the process, we can take that part out, since we're not likely to get much benefit from that in the future anyway. It's not going to change the projected numbers, since they're going to catch up pretty fast.
Right, I think the thing that's important to recognize was that we do still need that 1% from the cities for raising up to 3%. So it will just look, if you look last 6 years baseline, but it doesn't matter which one you pick, it's still pretty similar. If the city said, no, you can't have 1%, going up to 13% in that scenario would just keep us whole. Right. So just recognizing that we want to play nice and negotiate well with cities so that hopefully they are willing to continue to partner with us on that 1%. So we don't go backwards instead of forwards.
Right.
Just an observation.
So if we take the cities out as far as moving along, we can simplify the visual a little bit here. Anything else on page 4? Okay, we can simplify it somewhat, at least, and make it a little easier on the eyes on page 5. The same 3 baselines once again, and the same hold on the 30% for roads. So for example, in the second baseline, under the 15% column, we could expect approximately 950,000 in increased funds available. Any questions on that page?
Well, you're making me feel good about my back of the envelope math, because that's about what I was thinking it should be.
I'm not real good with graphs, but is this like one of these numbers mean that's how much more would be potentially given to another source that's.
Yeah, in the
that's-
green, yes.
Okay, in addition, 30% to the roads and then
Right.
whatever increase, the percentage would then go to, say, a sheriff's, increased sheriff patrol or something like
Well,
that.
we're talking about if we did this, having the new 30% go to something else, so
Okay.
enforcement, for example.
Okay,
So that's discretionary. I think that's the answer that you're
Yeah.
looking for.
okay.
Right, all separate from the 70% that's mandated for tourism.
Sorry. Does that mean then that the green numbers?
Money to put wherever we want.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
Okay, so it's a pretty good chunk of change.
Any other discussion on page 5? Okay, I'm gonna make it easier on the eyes once again. The last 3 pages are the same, a summary of information. There's 1 page for each of those baseline options. So the first one shows the 6-year average option, and then the other 2 are the other options. So it's an easier way to see the numbers.
Thank you.
And that's what I have.
Thank you for your work on that.
Okay, so moving on to the white paper. There's no changes on the first front and back, so just going to the last page, the second piece of paper, third page, with the increase. So we, as Bill stated at the beginning of the meeting, we know that it does have, an increase does have to go before the voters. The ordinance 74 approval process is the original approval process. That's the same as you saw before. The election timelines in the box are the same as before. It's just a data point. So what's really new here is the draft timeline to meet a November 5th election. So I think what would be good today, if the board can get there, is to start discussing the timeline for this. If we're doing it, if the board wants to proceed with an increase, are we looking at November or are we looking at May? This is a very draft, ambitious timeline to get on the November ballot, and I backed an ordinance approval process out of the ballot title deadline of August 16th. From today's date, if you say go on the November 5th election, we have about 2.5 months for all the public outreach and drafting of the ordinance and sorting through all these questions that we know are still out there. So that's what you would be looking for, a timeline. I've drafted some other ideas for just things to consider that I know we'll be getting through eventually. So I don't think we necessarily have to go through all that today. unless you decide you want to proceed, I think we could start talking about outreach strategies and that staff are gonna do what, but I'll just leave it at that. And give it to the board to discuss further.
Thank you. I think there are, for one thing, I think we should have a workshop in the very near future with Orla. I think we should move forward, trying to build a partnership with Orla and listen to their concerns if they have them, listen to their advice. In a meeting that Sarah and I and Nan had with Jason Brandt, he was talking about recommending that we reach out to their constituents, which are not the short-term rental license owners, but holders, but the lodging providers. Which doesn't mean that I'm suggesting we exclude the STR folks, but that specifically the Orla constituents or lodging providers. And I think we all know and have acknowledged that the opposition to this sort of thing would likely come from Orla. And so rather than do it otherwise, I would rather sit down at a table with them and say, here's our situation, here's what we're thinking, what do you think, how can we move forward? But I'd like to start there. That's the first outreach I'd like to do, and the sooner the better. And then I think we also need to know what the implications are for various elections. Obviously, waiting until May is the financial implication. But what are the implications for if we're going out with the radio bond in November? What are the implications for, are there, I don't have memorized this, the rules for certain kinds of elections are required to pass certain kinds of measures? Like, do we need a particular kind of election to pass this tax? Do we, or a particular majority of voters, et cetera? I don't know if there are any rules about that.
That's on your white paper.
Oh, good. Okay.
So the two elections before you are the next ones you can do this increase at, and it has that it does not, neither requires a 50% turnout.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. So, and what else is planned for the November election? What else is planned for the May election? So those are my initial thoughts. Commissioners?
I can give you mine if you like. Well, first of all, I agree with Commissioner Bell. I think the step one is to get the Orla folks over here and maybe even, I have to think about this, maybe even bring in some of the lodging people or do that on a separate effort, but at least start with them and have a conversation because having been a member of that organization for many years, they respond rather quickly to their membership. And if their membership says, hey, something's going on we don't like, they'll come anyway. We might as well have them come on our terms. So that would be number one. Number two, I would like to get the cities in and talk about this sooner than later, meaning in the next 2-3 weeks, and just work through what their options might be and what their preferences might be, and at least hear them out. The third thing, with respect to timing, I think it would be a challenge and probably a mistake, maybe a fatal mistake if it goes on the November ballot, because we will have the radio bond. And I asked first if there's anything else she's heard of, but of course there's some time between now and August filing. It's possible there's a fire bond on in Tillamook in May. And if that fails, they could turn right around and run it again in November. We don't know that. But there's some unknowns there. I also have some questions, and there's probably not an answer to this. If we take it up by 50%, 10 to 15, how much might that knock off the receipts? Meaning, and I think there's probably some case studies somewhere where there was a fairly substantial increase. Did it affect the people who came and paid the tax? Don't know. But maybe some jurisdiction somewhere could say, yeah, we really cranked it up and tourism dropped off by some amount. And then the last thing, and that's probably the last thing we talk about, maybe not, but would be the amount, whether it be 12 or 14 or 15 or 16 or all the numbers we have before us. And that's kind of a separate debate. So I would agree with, there needs to be a step 1, step 2, step 3 fairly quickly. And so we can either decide if it goes in November or not and how much it might be. And then, but more importantly, get the feedback from our folks who were in the business in one form or another.
So you said you think it could be a fatal mistake to go in November. Can you talk more about that?
Well, my experience with these issues, and it's purely anecdotal, I don't know of any raw data that's supportable, but when people see 2 or 3 money measures, they say, well, those folks want to get in our pocket again. No, no, no. I think you're much better off with a bullet than a shotgun. Maybe that's not the appropriate use of words here, but in other words, a single measure like the radio bond, which I'm pretty sure is rolling forward, that's going to take a considerable amount of time for a number of people, including me and others, and maybe all of us. And if we're trying to tell 2 stories at once or have another group doing a parallel effort, it may weaken both. So I would prefer to focus on one measure, get it through, and then talk about something else, understanding that delays by probably an entire fiscal year the ability to get this into the current budget. If it passed next May, I think the soonest we would get in would be July of the following year, which would be the 25-26. And that might be a question for council. If something is passed in the middle of May or end of May, and it's certified in June, is that enough time to actually make it effective in July? Or is there some statutory provision that pushes it out? I don't know that.
I'll have to look at that one, Doug. I don't know.
Okay.
Not that I think your ordinance will say it becomes, you will build into the ordinance when it becomes effective. So
So
pending approval of the voters and then
Effective as of July 1, whatever,
Yes.
following the May election.
Here, just for some suggestions on the November election, would you want to do it in January 1 or July 1 would seem to be reasonable? And if you did the May election, July 1 may be reasonable.
So, okay, so if that can be done, then that's not an issue, but that was a question I had. And then, of course, the last thing is the amount, is 14 more likely to pass than 15 or 16 or 13, or what's the magic number? And, I would use a comparison, but the strongest argument in my mind is simply that this is a tax paid by others
Right.
to pick up their fair share of what's costing to have all these services provided to them. And to me, that's a logical, and it's true.
Mhm.
And it's not an easy sell because it's a tax, but it's a truthful statement that can be made to the people. And I think a fair number of them, as they did in the past, would say, well, it's about time. What took you guys so long? But okay, so I'll stop talking for now.
Thank you. I have another question about your perspective that, because you've worked on more bond campaigns probably than I have. And so do you think that voters would make that distinction, will differentiate, like, this is the tax that we're going to pay on our property taxes. This is the tax that visitors are going to pay for services they're receiving when they're here. You think they'll?
I think some will, and I've always been of the opinions that voters are a whole lot smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. They say, well, they'll never figure that out. Well, I don't believe that is the case. I think people are pretty smart, especially when it comes to money, and they may well do that. All I know is from years of being around this, if there's 2 or 3 or 4 money measures from different agencies even, and they say, oh man, they're really going after our pocketbook, let's just clear the deck and start over. But that may not apply to all those people. And if the story is presented correctly, and it's not a story, if the truth is presented correctly, this is a tax for others. We're going to tax ourselves, plus our out-of-town residents, to build a radio system that's needed. And in addition to that, we're going to tax our visitors to help pay for a number of things, but that are impacts that are brought about in large measure by them. And that's what helped sell it before, when we did the road bond for 15 million and said the second half of that, we're going to ask for the room tax in 2013 to be effective 2014. And that's exactly what they did. And they said, okay, we'll fix our roads and we'll ask our visitors to help pay for some stuff. And that's why that 30% went to roads. That was a commitment from the commission back then. So,
Great.
long answer, I don't know, but they very well may draw the distinction and say, yeah, let's ask the folks coming this way to open up their wallet just a bit more and help us pay for whatever.
Okay. And I like your idea about finding out if other jurisdictions have increased taxes, if it's changed the level of business. I
Mhm.
suspect it wouldn't, because I think it's minor and people who are coming have already made the
Mhm.
decision to come. But I would like to see some data on it.
It's
So,
worth asking, but I would agree too. If you're going somewhere, let's say you're going to Boise, Idaho for a weekend, nobody asks about the room tax. You
Right.
just go.
Right. Yeah.
Just, Mary Faith, Doug, in my efforts to try to figure out whether we had to go out to a vote or not, I established some rapport with the Lincoln County Council, who's a real sharp person, and I learned, and you maybe know this, that they went out for a 1% increase in last November's election, which passed. And as Rachel indicated, Doug, their measure says, if it becomes effective January 1st, if it's passed. And that one, Ms. Yulee told me, for what it's worth, was 70% passage rate in that jurisdiction. And I don't know if they did any outreach or anything like that. To be honest, when I talked with Rachel this morning, I thought, well, why would you need any outreach or anything? But I guess that's kind of beyond my scope, but it just seems to me like you were saying, Doug, it just seems like there's a high likelihood you would think that it's gonna pass. Maybe I'm wrong, but.
I think part of that depends on if you have opposition to it,
Yeah.
right? Because if you have opposition, then the information that's going to be put out is going to be confusing because that's how they work, right? So I think there's a piece to that where we have to, and I think we have to assume we would have opposition from our short-term rental operators and potentially realtors within that realm as well, just, given what has happened in the last 2 years with our short-term rental work. So I think we do have to expect that we will need to do education for our voters. I did talk with Rachel this morning, and Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about how you feel about the November and the concerns, since you're the one that at this point is digging in deep to the radio bond and you have a lot of that work up, in your head and up to your eyeballs. I'd like to have you share your perspective if you're willing, just on the workload and plan and.
Yeah, I do have concerns about the radio bond, the impact to the radio bond. I understand that we're primarily impacting two completely different user groups. I think the voters will be able to distinguish between the two, but as Doug said, they're smart, and I would expect that we would certainly have people who are short-term rental owners will technically be impacted by both because it may impact their business. We won't know for sure, but they could perceive it as a money measure that is ultimately impacting them. So in that vein, I'm just really concerned. My priority, I think, is the radio project. I think TLT is important to raise. I just don't want to raise it at the expense of the radio project, because I think we have more flexibility in when we do the TLT project, but there's a lot of urgent, critical need for the radio project, and we have funding already secured for that. So that's one perspective from me on the timing in November. Additionally, it's a lot of work. I expect radio for me is going to be a high percentage of my workload over the next through November, even with a political action committee doing a lot of the advocating. And so one of the questions I had today, if we were going to proceed, is who's going to be doing the TLT work? I would expect to be involved, but not necessarily. This is also a very heavy lift. These are really big projects. I agree with all the things that have been suggested for how to proceed. Some of them are already on my white paper. I mean, I can see the path to get there. This stuff takes a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of your staff time. And I'm, Doug, pulling the cities together within 2 or 3 weeks. I'm that's very ambitious, for example. I think we can get a meeting with Orla quickly, but having a meeting with Orla in the next couple of weeks, the cities within a month and a half would be more realistic to me, and that's not even necessarily getting approval from their councils. That's just an initial discussion. We've almost already eaten up the 2.5 month timeline. So I say that not to be a Debbie Downer, but I just want to be very realistic about what I think it's going to take to move this through. And I think we can do it. I don't want to rush it, and I want to do it thoughtfully. And I'm just concerned we're not going to have time to do it right in November. So that's my thought, just initial thoughts. But I think regardless, we should be starting the process, but there's a lot of pieces here. We're not just raising a tax. So.
Thank you. In answer to one of your questions, I assume that I would be leading it because Doug is working with you on the radio project and you're working on timber. And so I hope the sheriff would be doing it with me. We've talked briefly about it, but in no amount of detail. So I assume that would be me, and the timing maybe will line up with incoming parks director at some point. I may not be the director of parks, presumably. And so I'll have more time to work on that. I think we should proceed. I think we should have a workshop with Orla. I think we should start talking to the cities. I don't think we have to decide today about November or May. I think we need to gather more information, but I do appreciate your concerns for sure. For sure.
The sheriff won't be available because I'm going to use him on a radio bond.
Well, he's gonna have to do double duty.
He can do it both.
He's up there. Maybe you'd like to share.
Please.
Sorry, I signed on late. I got busy getting ready for negotiations starting tomorrow. So I've got a couple of different viewpoints. I think a TLT, if we've determined that it has to go to a vote, get it on the ballot as soon as possible. I think it's going to pass with flying colors, alluding to what Bill was saying, is that 70% in Lincoln County for a 1%. I think Tillamook County is going to vote that or pass it in a heartbeat. I'm certain you'll have opposition. The exact group, Commissioner Scar, you mentioned that it's the same group that opposed the ordinance update. I'm certain they will oppose it, which is clearly their right. But I think that the citizens of Tillamook County are definitely smart enough to understand it's a tourist tax and not something they're going to get taxed on their bill each year. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so I think they'll pass it with flying colors. I think they'll pass it at 4%, 5%, 6%. And I think, as Doug was alluding to, honesty and straightforward answers is exactly what's going to get them to do that. Where is the money going to go specifically? I don't think anybody in this group is proposing removing the 30% from roads. I think that stays rock solid, doesn't change. It's the 30% from the new tax, and where does it go? Probably even get as far as to go with what the 70% is going to go for, and talk about specifically where it's going to go. Don't leave any question marks about where that's going to go. And again, I think it passes with flying colors. If we had time to get it on the May ballot, I would say do it. But whether or not we do, I don't know. As everybody knows, I am in support of the radio tower bond because we need it. I've been a part of those conversations, but I have a question, and Rachel, you may be the best to answer this, or maybe the pollsters that we worked with looked at it. I don't know, but the absolute truth and reality of what's going to happen in November at a federal level for elections is going to be extremely controversy, filled with a tremendous amount of tension. Whether it's the vote's easy for you or somebody else and really hard for others, we have to assume that it's going to be an extremely contentious and very tension-filled election. I'm sure that we'll be busy keeping an eye on just our local drop boxes. We had to do that in 2020 for the same reason. So my question is with that much potential turmoil is asking for a 25 million bond the right timing? Do we wait till May or November of the next year? Does that give us more time to prep and do outreach? I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. I'm saying that I think should be a valid question we should answer. Whether or not the turmoil that's going to surround this upcoming election in November is going to affect the ability for us to go after money. As Doug said, you put a whole bunch of money questions on there, people are going to start saying, no, they're coming after us, and they're not even going to look at what we're looking at. So, you know, maybe you do TLT in November, because that's not necessarily out of their pocketbooks, and then May or November of the next year, you're looking at the road or at the bond. I don't know. But I'd be very, very curious if Rachel's aware of whether or not the research team looked at that as a potential for failure of a bond.
I don't recall them looking at that specifically.
Is that something we could look at, or are we just going to trudge ahead and hope that it works out okay?
We're interviewing the firms that will help spread the word, advocate actually, and one of them will be selected here in the next few weeks. And one of the questions we could certainly ask is, what is their opinion and their history, and what do they know about this very issue?
Yeah.
Because theoretically, they will have gone through a half a dozen or a dozen of these things around the Northwest and could speak to that very issue. At least that would be one of the questions I would want an answer to, and see what their perspective is. They may say, hey, exactly what you said, Sheriff, that you do stuff on a presidential election at your peril, and you do other measures on a non-presidential year or election. I don't know, but we need to ask the question. But
I think that is a question we should absolutely ask, because not only is it a presidential election, but it's certain to be as sketchy as it was in 2020, you know, and I just would like to know the answer to that question. The other thing I wanted to point out just really quick, Doug, I thought it was a great idea. Mary Faith, you mentioned it, about looking into other jurisdictions as to whether or not they increased the tax and what kind of effect it had on tourism coming in. Not a bad idea to look at that, but I would be very, very cautious, because, you know, Portland is not the same as Tillamook. So if you say, hey, Portland, what did you do? Or Bend or whatever, you increased, oh, you saw a decrease. Well, you know, it's just not the same. So make sure that you're measuring, or, you know, I would want to make sure that you're not comparing Tillamook to, you know, a Bend or something, because the things that we have are far different that people come to. Our proximity to big, you know, locations. I forget who maybe it was Commissioner Olson that said we have 3 million people within an hour's drive from us or something. Somebody said that. I forget exactly who it was, but you know, Bend may not have that. So, and I'm not saying we're going to compare to Bend or Portland. I'm just saying, be aware that Tillamook is unique. I don't think that tourism is going to drop at all. I think, as we've just said, you know, when you've decided you're going somewhere, you're paying. You know, I don't know that I've ever looked at taxes. So, you know, when I book a hotel, that's where I'm going. I'm booking a hotel. Taxes are not part of it. So that's just my thought process.
Thank you, Sheriff. Okay. Anything else on this today?
Well, if we're going to take the sheriff's suggestions and talk about it, some of those decisions need to be made fairly quickly, simply because the wheels are in motion right now. Like on the radio bond, there's the actual specifications are essentially done, although there's some that I would want to question, but nothing too significant unless it goes down some road. But the timing, and if when we go through this process and the RFP is on the street and closes, I think soon, and then so we'll interview 3 or 4 or 5 firms, or however many respond. And if we say, oh, we've decided to push this off a year, we've lost a little bit of credibility and time, and maybe they'll go looking for other projects, and so we might not have the same options. In other words, we've already set everything in motion, which is not to say it can't be stopped. I'm just saying that's part of the bigger picture. Is there's quite a bit of inertia on that now, and there is already $2 million in the bank ready to go. And the other thing is, we've got a number presented by the consultants. And I can almost guarantee you that if that gets pushed off, the 25 million becomes 27 or 28 or 30 or whatever it is. And do we then re-engineer that and recost everything? You know, it's like, it's another piece of the puzzle, I guess, all I'm saying. So,
Yeah, it feels like we may be just far enough down the road that it would be very costly and just, we've put a lot of work into it that would then have to be redone. I think it would be useful to talk to, I would think the pollsters might be the folks to say, you know, you've done this polling for a lot of time in a lot of different environments. You know, what you're recommending that you think we can do this. I assume that polling took into account that this was going to be a presidential election and potentially a deeply followed presidential election. So I guess that might just be the only circle back that would occur to me that might be useful with a contractor we've already worked with to say, when you did this, as you're thinking about this, do you take into consideration the type of election that it's going to be in? And is there anything different about, you know, this presidential election that would have you be concerned? And it's certainly a question you can also go ask in your marketing interviews that would say, you know, what would you do differently, or would you do something differently? What is your experience in marketing during a presidential election that, you know, may be somewhat contentious or highly watched at the very least. But yeah, I feel like to Doug's point, we're far enough down the road that unless either our pollster or our potential marketer said, yeah, this is a really tough one. I don't think, you know, I think the messaging is going to get lost in the fray, which I think is part of what the sheriff is saying. I would ask my experts.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we ought to ask the question. I don't think we should halt the process because, as you've all said, we're already in the process, but we should ask the question. And if we, you know, particularly if we haven't asked the question, because people might not offer up that information without us asking. They might not say, hey, wait, we don't think you should do this, unless we ask. So.
And I would say I would think carefully about putting both of them on the ballot. I think they're vastly different. I think you could even weave the messages in a way that it could be a positive, you know, kind of what the road was. This is what you're paying as taxpayers. This is what visitors are paying. But that's not for me to decide. That's for more of a marketing firm, I think, type of conversation to say, you know, they know how to market to people. They know how to get things across. Are these two messages too similar? Are they going to get confused? Is this not something that makes sense? But you know, Rachel and I did also talk about, you know, we could do polling related to TLT at pretty much any time. You know, and we could go ahead and do some of that work, but yeah, I feel like I don't have the expertise to make the decision about if they would cross over each other. I do think we have probably the knowledge and expertise to make the decision about whether or not we have enough staff and staff time to get them both ready and to do them both justice. And I think the answer to that, you know, we would have to probe a little deeper as to what other supports we could bring on board, but I can see the deep concern there with just having enough time to apply to both of them.
Sarah?
Thank you, Commissioner Bell. I did hear back from Jason Brandt, and they can join us next Wednesday at 2 p.m. if that works. If you want to have that discussion with them that quickly.
Well, I don't know what else we have on our list for next.
We have utility undergrounding and retirement plan meeting. Both Doug.
That when we're having the retirement, Milliman and those guys, are they coming on our board briefing on May 1st?
No,
No.
It's a different retirement plan meeting.
that's the one you wanted to have at the board briefing. I think that's the board's discussion to talk about how you wanted to proceed with a future meeting.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but it's not, so then there would
That's
be,
not the one, no, that
No.
one, no,
okay.
don't think so.
So it was just a discussion amongst ourselves, so it shouldn't take I was thinking that full 2 hours that we had scheduled with Milliman, but that's not that meeting.
Okay. seem like discussion with Orla's will work for
Yes,
this one.
yes, I think that should happen in any event, simply because if we hear things that are troubling, then we can deal with them right away. If not, maybe that changes the mix as we roll along, so.
Yeah, and we'll have more information in terms of their recommendations.
Mhm.
Yeah, because Orla may be able to help us figure out the best process for actually talking to them and getting this information out to their membership in the best possible way to have it,
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully
he's-
be seen
he's,
as a positive.
He can come over here for a half hour, an hour. I think that's just great. I think that'd be productive in any event, so
Mhm.
absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on this? All right. Then we are moving on to HR, I believe. Draft review of reclassification. Jody, nice to see you in person.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Appreciate your work.
Let us know if you need any more information.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
You don't get to see on line when I. Good afternoon, board. This is an item that we had on a previous board briefing where some of the materials was not provided in advance for the board to review. We're looking at our processes for reclassification. And so what we put together is a reclassification procedure. So in your packet, there's a few things. There's just a written draft of a reclassification procedure. And then there's a copy of some AFSCME language that was put in our contract in 2016. The procedure has been mirroring that process for some time. So when we talk about it's not a new procedure per se, but we're writing it out. So instead of saying we just follow what AFSCME says, we put it in a draft. There are a few things that have changed since this reclassification review was put in the AFSCME contract, and how maybe the outcome may look different and some of the details we need may look different. So in 2018, the Oregon Pay Equity Act was passed. That talked about work of comparable character and paying individuals less so based upon their performance and more so based upon either seniority or whatever factors an organization adopted. Tillamook did not have a bona fide performance management system when this was enacted. And so generally seniority, skills and experience, those are the types of bona fide factors we look at for Oregon pay equity. And so the other part that's impacting this particular project or process is in 2022, the Board of Commissioners came up with our compensation philosophy. So if we go back to 2016, there would be a perception that a position would be under market, and that manager or director would be bringing that forward saying, I think this position is behind market. They would make their case to the Human Resources Department. The Human Resources Department would research it and respond back. That was not always within a particular market set. There could be comparators that weren't considered. There could be comparators that were considered. And I can't find any common way that information came in. So back then there was usually some sort of, this position's behind market, I'd like to reclass it. And the outcome would be that an individual will get a salary increase. With Oregon Pay Equity, the laws have limited performance as being a factor outside of having a bona fide performance system that is measurable and defensible. So the ability to negotiate or to bring a position forward on salary alone is a different defining factor now. We are looking at the compensation philosophy. So maybe there's a position that we say is off market or the job has changed and we go out and look. maybe the job hasn't changed, it's just has a greater volume. I think the pace of the county has changed over the last 10 years exponentially. And I think we're all feeling it, right? We're also feeling the economy where our dollar doesn't go as far. And so it feels like we're really behind market. And so we'll look at those job duties to see what has changed, but sometimes those job duties are at the same level. There's just more of them. And if we talk about some of the work that community development was just talking about, right? There's lots of work going on and there's a huge volume, but it's probably at the level that it has been. It's just there's more of it. And in that case, that position, we could define the work, we could update the words and the duties, but it may have no impact on market. And this has been a change over the years due to pay equity, due to our compensation philosophy, and also how our positions compare to each other, because there are positions across the county that look very similar. Again, education, skill, effort, how does that fall into our pay plan? And so with this reclassification procedure, the importance is that we need information about how that position has changed. You know, so here's what you're doing, and there is a new form that we introduced in bargaining called a desk audit. That desk audit form is updated to fall in line with the factoring that we've done, that work we did with Troop and the last project. But there was a similar form that Mona used, and we tried to put some of these samples in the packet. So there is a position review form that has a lot of boxes.
That is the desk audit, or that's?
Yes, the boxes are the new form, the boxy form. And then there is the old form. You can see the date of, it's a request for desk audit or reclassification review. This one was dated 6/1 of 2016. And when this form didn't have enough information, Mona sent this form. Please tell us what you do. And so it is not necessarily a different process, but a different form. And we're asking greater details of that employee's responsibility or skill level to do a particular task. So as we start measuring that, not all employees are great at writing. This form is a little bit more of check the box that applies. And so we have a little bit more guided approach to how they provide that form. There are some employees that are great writers. And so having the ability to say, just through checking the boxes, sometimes helps those candidates that might not, or those employees that might not know how to fill out a form, to have an equal opportunity to be reclassed. Whereas someone who is a great writer might be able to do very well here, but someone who's not might not.
So I'm looking at these, I see the one that says Mona's F Drive 2016, then thereafter is position review form. And the first couple of pages in my packet are all writing. And then thereafter, there are a couple of pages, 3 pages of box checking. So so those 5 pages, is that the position review form? So it includes 2 pages of writing, or is it either or?
So there's some broader boxes that say, describe your job function. Is it a new responsibility and what percentage of the time? That is part of the new form. Whereas the old form, the description of duties, percentage of the time and frequency. And it was a 1-pager.
Okay. Okay, so you are asking employees to do all 5 pages?
We are.
Okay.
Part of the project, that I'll be back for soon to talk about, is the Troop proposal. I also had brought where Troop would be doing these desk audits for all of our current active positions and trying to rewrite job descriptions so it's not as heavy of a lift for our staff. But in the meantime, I think there's a desire to get some positions reclassed. So some managers don't want to wait for that project. They just want it looked at now. And so we're trying to make sure that we identify the process hasn't changed, but maybe some of the forms that they've used in the past have more information and are divided up a little differently in how they complete the form. And it does fall into how we group, classify, and identify where on the range a position would be placed.
Okay.
Any questions or concerns on the reclassification form or process?
I have one.
Please.
Back not too long ago, you sent out what the adjusted salary schedules and all, and I think maybe when you and I were talking, even there in our county, there were it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, 200 and different classifications, roughly. What do you recall what that number is?
171 to
Oh,
176
a lot.
unique job classifications to
And
the
it seemed
county.
to me in a county that has 300 employees, how in the world can we have that many classifications? And that's more of a philosophical thing than in reality. And maybe that's exactly how it's done, but are we unusual in the world of government, or are we right where everybody else is and everybody has a slightly different job classification? Not everybody, but there are that many.
I
And
think,
some are unoccupied. I understand that.
I think there's a couple of compensation philosophies where some will have these really broad descriptions where, like a program manager, you could have a program manager that could be in any department based upon their skills. Manager 1, manager 2, manager 3. We have more unique job descriptions for the departments. We have a parks director instead of director level number 1. And so ours is more narrowly defined in how we describe the work versus those broad classifications. We also, based upon our prior conversation on that Troop contract, I think we have about 30 job classifications that aren't actively being used in that 170-ish number. And so would we be looking at those positions, or would we be archiving those positions? And some departments do plan on someday filling it. Some departments may not. An example might be that maybe we're no longer working on a particular program. And so we could go ahead and take that job description off our pay plan, and we wouldn't do the work on that. So that could reduce the number of jobs we have to review.
It just seemed like that's an excessive number where basically there's a job classification for every 2 people. And that's, I know that's not the case and how it actually sorts out, but you know, well, I won't go there. Just, are we normal? I guess.
If
Maybe
you've seen
that's-
one county, you've seen one county, Doug.
Well, okay. Yeah. And you're the person to answer that because you've worked elsewhere. I mean, where are we on the bell curve?
You know, I would say that, yes, you're normal. It probably started because we used to be one of the little counties, right? We grew up as one of the little counties and we weren't dealing with this mass volume. So we have 18 departments, and each one of those departments over time, and even the short time I've been here, have organically grew based upon their business needs. And I don't think that the county ever, took a look at everything and did an overhaul and made any changes. They've just continued to organically grow. So I don't think the county is unusual in that manner. I think when we met, I said that Tillamook used to be one of the biggest little counties. Now we're the littlest big county. And over time that's changed. And I just don't think we've, looked at our compensation philosophy, which the board has started making strides in the last few years. It was small enough that we managed, and now we're looking at this from a much broader view. There's lots of ways to do compensation. And so it's not unusual. Do we want to keep it that way? Perhaps. Or do we want to look at a different approach? There's lots of ways to do it. I've tried not to fix it if it's not been broken. But I do think one of the resets to allow future comp work to go forward, it's important to make sure that we have well-written job descriptions, not only from a marketing perspective, but where an employee can truly identify what that job looks like. If we're dealing with any kind of ADA accommodations, do we know whether you have to bend, lift, twist, here, those types of things would all be important to make sure that an employee could do the reasonable functions of the job. And also for a manager to make sure that our employees are performing in a manner that is appropriate with the job description. When you use those really broad job descriptions, that's a lot harder for that manager to do.
Well, no, I understand, and I didn't really have any quarrel with it. I just seemed that we had so many that maybe there was an easier way forward, but you make a good case that it is what it is. And yes, I can see the county is evolving and the jobs evolve and things change, and maybe being more specific is more beneficial for everybody in the long run. Don't know. But thank you for the answer.
I recall when Damien LaViolette was here, we added more distinct classifications in IS, and his reasoning for that was that they have a small but mighty team and people have distinctly different responsibilities.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so thank you for this. I really appreciate it. And I know that we've had conversation about the difference between reclass and promotion. And I haven't read this carefully yet, but is promotion referred to in here, or is that a separate policy?
So this is a reclassification procedure.
Okay.
And so when we're talking about reclassification, we're looking at an employee that their job description has grown. And so maybe there's additional duties, maybe organically through people leaving and retiring, they've taken on more responsibilities. And in that case, if we reviewed a reclassification and it was deemed that we need a new job description and maybe that was tied with a new salary range, we would reclass them to that position. I think it's often looked at as a promotion because they're going up in a classification, but they were reclassed in that position. When we're talking about a promotion, the promotions look different in when there is a promotion opportunity that is either an internal opportunity where they would post it internally, there are some posting requirements, or it is an open competitive process. And I think in that particular situation, that looks different. A promotion through the current rules, you get an automatic 5%. So you're tethered to whatever your prior position is. So if you're competing for an internal promotion, you're tethered to either the bottom range of that new position or 5%. Whereas with a reclassification, you are going to wherever the marketplace is for that job.
Okay. So will we also have a procedure for promotion? Perfect, because people have been confused about the difference and should it be this or should it be that, and where is it documented, and what's our procedure? So if it's an entirely separate procedure from this, that's fine, and I think we could just have that procedure so people can refer to both of them.
Well, and if time was unlimited, we have a number of new elected officials that'll come on board or interim, and we have some new directors coming on board. We have managers that are promoted. We're trying to build out a supervisor 101 or a manager 101 of recruitments, how to do reclasses, performance management, procedures for workers' comp cases, procedures for FMLA, OFLA, and paid leave. Because the world keeps moving and changing, it's really hard for folks who are new to the organization to figure out how we do those pieces. And we haven't historically been keeping up with those documents. So it's building that information. So it isn't a secret. So some directors prefer to go, I want to go look at what is the procedure, what is the process. Some will pick up the phone. And so rather than having to get the super secret handshake in the hallway about how do I do this next process, to try to set up our new leaders for success. I hope that I can build out a couple of checkoff modules to say, please talk to Rachel about procurement and how to work with the BOC and civic clerk. I almost called it court clerk. How do you do those pieces? How do you meet with the treasurer to do X, Y, Z? How do you, and just as they're
Training,
coming
yeah.
on board, they have at least some information to get started. You know, some folks are very lucky; they have their predecessor to train them, but often they just kind of get dropped in, and trying to give them those tools for success is rather important. But I do think that's a county need that all of us would much rather have than this historic place where we're still trying to figure out what that looks like.
Perfect. One question I have about this is when we've talked about this particular thing, reclass, in leadership team meetings, I recall that a couple leaders have asked to work on this with you and review this and talk to you about this, namely Chris and Dawn. So I wonder if you are willing to share this with them and ask for their feedback. You know, I think that since it's our leaders who are working with this, it would be helpful, especially since they said they had an interest.
Yes, I have. I've also reached out to them for appeal purposes. One of the appeals processes is that if an employee or a manager or director is not happy with the findings from HR, there are appeal rights. And then there is a board that we would take that to and having them review that on a secondary basis. And both Dawn and Chris have offered their assistance in that. We would be looking at a third member for that board review, so it would go to someone other than HR. We may have to rotate out board members should one of their reclasses be going to the board, but that is an appeals process that is within the procedure.
Terrific. I think that sounds great. So are you willing to send this to them and ask for their feedback?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. That'd be great. I assume you're familiar with this
I
already.
am, thank you.
Do you have anything? No. Okay. Anything else for you?
No, I'm good with the process so far. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Anything
you very
else?
much for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Proposed motion.
That's me.
All right.
In 2019, the county filed its annual application for a judgment and decree and foreclosure. And one of the properties that was involved was owned by Mr. Stanley Silva. And they have a 2-year redemption period. Redemption period came and went back in 21. It turns out, Joel figured it out, or Cassandra knew it, that there is a person habitating these premises. And as a consequence, we haven't taken title to that property. Joel went out there and met with the woman who lives there, and he was very distraught, obviously, at the prospect of her being removed, and, said she would end her life if you know, she got taken out of there. And so Joel engaged Northwest Senior Services in 1922 I'm sorry, 2022. And they went out there and kind of got the same story. So I picked it up because the tax department justifiably is saying, well, what are we going to do? You know, this property is now 2 or 3 years past the time when we could have taken title, and we think it's time to take title. So I called the woman, and the story's still basically the same. She's 73 years old. She's not paying any rent. She keeps care of the house, you know, has a tale of, you know, just, you know, probably legitimate woe about, you know, she has no place to go, et cetera. I talked to Erin about maybe having CARE go out there, and I think she followed up on it. The property has about $20,000 in taxes owing approximately. There are a couple of liens on it. When Cassandra and the tax department began this, looking into this property, she was able to contact a son of Mr. Silva with the idea that maybe somebody in the family would like to come forward and, you know, redeem, and they expressed no interest in it, which in hindsight is a little bit interesting because there's a Department of Revenue senior deferral lien for about $83,000, a really small IRS lien for about $1,200. The property's assessed at $150,000. The real market value is almost $300,000. So, you know, it's not the first time that this has come up. So, you know, frankly, Cassandra and the tax department are pretty strong on let's go take deed. And if we're going to go take deed, we have to do it by June 6th, or the new bill that the legislature passed says you can't take title after June 6th until, what is it, the end of 2025, I think. So, you know, I'm not really chomping at the bit to go take title, because if we take title, I think we have to ask or physically remove the woman, because we can't, I don't think, have her sitting in a house that we own and, you know, something goes wrong and we're on the hook. So, you know, I'm in a little bit of, not a dilemma, but I wanted the board to be aware of what was going on. And as I said, you know, I'm not real gung ho on doing it, but I surely want to do what the tax department would like me to do and understand their position. And so I brought it. I'm kind of wondering, maybe you guys could take some of the pressure off me, or
And I
help
did,
me out.
yeah, and I did reach out to CARE, and they are willing to have a case manager make contact. I've been waiting for them to let me know if they want a county employee to go with them. You know, or they just want to reach out by phone. We do have both a phone number and address, and CARE worked on a project like this when I was still at CARE for a different individual, where it was a similar situation where somebody was going to get evicted, and they were able to get her, in her case, I believe, into some kind of senior care. So, you know, I personally would like to, if we're going to move forward, to at least provide her with some resource so that we are not just kicking her out without giving her some support and some help with both where she may live and her mental health, if that's, you know, going to be negatively impacted. So working on that side of it to see what we can set up. But June is a very short timeline to find housing in this market.
And, you know, kind of as Rachel pointed out this morning when I talked with her, you know, the strange part about it is, even if we take title, which, you know, we sure could, if we can't put it up for sale anyway, you know, it sits there. So, you know, I think, Doug, you're an old real estate guy. You know, maybe you know more about this than you probably do, but I mean, I've heard that sometimes it's actually better to maybe have somebody in the house than to have it
Vacant.
vacant. I don't know.
Well, yes, people, it's always better to have an occupant now. So my couple of questions, may I ask a couple? I'm assuming the house you said is worth 300,000, so.
That's what Denise has on it for real.
So there, it has some value, and I'm assuming it's not run down, ready to collapse under its own weight. So it's,
The photograph doesn't look like it. I haven't been there, but no.
what's the situation with utilities, do you know?
She pays electrical bill. She has water that she shares with a neighbor.
And so it's habitable, and she's living there and.
Has Doug, if I might interject, since I think 2010, 2011, she had, no, probably longer than that. She had a rental agreement with the gentleman who owned the property, who passed away. And, it became.
So who owns it now? It's the
decedent, Mr. Silva.
Yeah, okay. And so that's why it's fallen into foreclosure. There's
Yep.
nobody there to pay the taxes, and so, well, I get, my main concern is we treat this situation the same as if we've had a prior one, and I don't know if that's the case, but I don't know that we want to start making distinction, but that's just my first pass and nobody, I can't imagine anybody says, well, let's set her in her chair out on the front yard and drive on. That doesn't work either, so I don't have a good answer. I'd like the county to do what it's done before, if it ever has, or maybe what's done elsewhere, understanding why reinvent the wheel if other organizations have had a similar situation. But, every one of these cases is different. And she, from what I gather, she's mentally competent, able to pay a few bills, so she must have Social Security or disability or something coming in. Maybe a PO box or mail delivery and all of that, so.
Yeah, and we have had this come up before.
Okay.
And I think Joel may have been involved with one where we actually did eventually have the police go out and, they removed them. The other ones, over the passage of time, like this one, several years, we finally were able to convince the folks who were there that it was in their best interest to move. And that's contrasting it with the places, there have been a couple where the house was run down and there were, literally, I guess you can make a distinction amongst squatters. I guess you could call Ms. Louise a squatter in a way because, she's living there for free, but, where some
One last,
that you wondered about, they appeared, they had all the trappings of, drug addiction and just looking for a place to crash and so they left voluntarily too.
so we, the county, are not putting this stuff on the market now. We've got suspended that process because of the Minnesota case and maybe other items. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, boy, I don't have any clever advice. I'm sorry. It's got the key to me, you got a living, breathing human being there. I don't see putting her out in the rain or the sunshine, either one.
All right.
Yeah. It seems to me like what's changed is the fact that we no longer know what we can do with foreclosed property. So, if we were operating under the same guidelines or procedures that we had been for the last 5 years, I think we would proceed because it would be fair because they've gone through all the steps and done all the things. But what's changed is there a point right now to following through with this, given that we just decided a couple weeks ago that we're not moving forward with the sale of foreclosed properties?
Yeah, and we can't.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a reason that we need to do this now, given that we don't know what we're doing with foreclosed properties anyway?
I do see that Cassandra is on, and Cassandra made some comments related to this in another meeting when we touched on it briefly. I don't know if she would like to speak to it or exactly to Commissioner Bell's question specifically, why do it if we can't sell it? What is the, Thank you, Cassandra, for joining us.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So really, one of the main issues is that we're not following statute. So you have to look at it from the other point of view is this is statute. We're supposed to take title after 6 years, right? So does this get out too that the county just lets you live there for 6, 7, 8, 10 years? You know, we need to have some sort of teeth. Now, I of course feel for this person. I do not want to kick her out, but also at some point we just can't keep kicking it down the road. Okay. So that's my concern there is that is there also something else, you know, that we're not thinking of, you know, would it be better for her to leave this home? The son said that it's filled with asbestos and there's no legal water, you know, so is staying there a detriment to her health as well?
So you said there's no legal water, meaning, didn't you say then, Bill, she gets her water from a neighbor or?
Yeah, yes,
We-
I'm not sure.
Okay, so
Whether
what, whoever,
there's legal water, or how it
Yeah.
all works
Okay.
out, or she taps in on their line or.
Right.
Yeah.
The email thread that I read, that I was looking at to give care background, indicated that the water right did not exist any longer for the home and that she was getting water from the neighbor.
okay.
So I don't, yeah, because none of us know for sure if that's true. My thought would be, you know, having care go out and meet with her and work toward moving her is a really good idea, because a year from now, we will be here again. Hopefully with the Tyler P. Hennepin thing having been resolved at the end of the long session in June of 25, right? That there will be some process by which we can move forward, and we will want to move forward. And it's going to take some time to find a location for this this individual, assuming that they are willing at some point to go. So starting that conversation, creating that relationship with the case manager that can help them feel like there is an alternative for them is not going to be an overnight process. So it does seem like it is useful to begin this process, standing on the fact that it is statute, and at some point we are going to have to do it. You know, so whether we do it with the being able to take title by June, unless we're gonna let her live there post taking title. I think taking title is gonna be a tough one, because I don't think we're gonna have an option likely by June, other than here's your suitcase, here's your car, have a nice day. So I guess I would say the two don't have to be mutually exclusive, perhaps, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I agree. Let's start the care process, and thank you for having the conversation.
That certainly makes the most sense. Cassandra, what happens if we didn't do anything? What are the consequences of not following the statute?
Well, I mean, if I suppose Department of Revenue could perform an audit at some point. As far as, you know, any internal consequences, it just accrues more interest that we, you know, you'll have to write off. But I think for us in our department, as long as we're taking steps and moving forward towards something and not just putting a pause on it like we have been doing for a few years.
Are we at the 6 years, Cassandra?
We're past by 2 years. So we could have taken deed 2 years ago.
Are there any other similar people situated in a same case, or is this a one-off?
Yeah, we don't have any other situations right now that will come before you.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Yep.
input. It's a really difficult situation, and I understand your concern.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
So, you know, I guess we can sort of see how care works out.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll be surprised and they can get somewhere before June. And I guess the best way for me maybe is to just come back and see if anything happens in the next couple of weeks, and recognizing we have that June 6th deadline.
So I would be quite surprised if they were able to help her find a location prior to June.
Yeah, me too.
But I think that we're looking at realistically is June of 25, post long session, right? Where there will be ideally, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being overly hopeful, Rachel, but there has to be some solution to Tyler v. Hennepin at that point that's going to allow us to move forward. So, you know, knowing and being able to share with this particular individual that this is coming, You know,
Okay.
it may not be this month, it may not be next month, but certainly by June of 25, you will be, you know, having to leave this location. This is not going to be something that is a lifetime home for you. And let's work together because you're gonna have to get on wait lists, gonna have to do all that stuff, right? Given what little information I have about the individual, I would expect that it would be one of our perhaps senior
Yeah.
apartments. So,
Yeah, and some of those wait lists are 3 years long, so the sooner they can get on it, the better.
Yeah.
Rachel, as the manager of our
Hmm.
foreclosure program, do you have thoughts? No recommendations for us?
Nope, I've already shared my thoughts with Bill and he conveyed them earlier. I don't-
Perhaps a little more strongly, I would say, convey than I
no.
convey. No, I don't mean that, anything by that, but yeah, more cut and dried, I guess, maybe than me.
Okay.
I mean, kind of the bottom line is one could say, we're not gonna be able to sell it anyway, so.
Right.
Taking title other than, you know, the statutory requirement that, you know, we take title at some point is the other side of the coin, I guess.
I guess I feel like that will creep up on us faster than we know.
Yeah,
I think that's my thought is just that the ability to take title and sell it will creep up on us sooner than we know.
and, in deference to Cassandra, of course, I mean, this has been cooking for
Oh, yeah.
2+ years and
Sure.
now your council's bringing it to you with, you know, a month and a half to get something done and.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
So, you know, you know, there has been some, hasn't been front and center on anybody's radar
Sure.
until now.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
and I thank you for taking it up.
Mhm. All right, well, that concludes our list of topics. My fellow commissioners, do you have other stuff?
I was at the Home and Garden Show last weekend. I have a lovely list of constituent questions and I was gonna say Chris is on here. So I just want to let Chris know I'll be reaching out to him. Most of them were road related questions. There were a couple of parks related questions.
Like, where's my annual pass?
No,
I get
thankfully they
1,000 of
weren't
those.
that one. They weren't that one. So Chris, I'll reach out to you. There's a couple of questions that I think will be easier. I left my list upstairs when I came down here, so I'll reach out to you. One of the parks ones, however, was, someone asked me, why do we allow parking on the road? And Chris, you might know the answer, so it's a good thing you're here too. It might be you and Parks. Why do we allow parking on the road near the Solly Smith boat ramp in the wide spots when we don't allow it? So no permit required, but at Memaloose, there's a whole section of the road that also requires a permit. So why isn't there a permit required on the Solly Smith road? Because it's a mess and it's not fair and people are parking for free.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So does anybody know why that decision was made?
No, with Memaloose, it's definitely that they're there to use the boat ramp. And
Mhm.
maybe it just hasn't risen to the attention at Solly Smith, but if they're, especially if they're parked there with trailers, they're there. to
You know,
use the
they're
boat
there to use
ramp.
the boat ramp.
Yeah.
Chris, do you know
Good
anything about that one?
So I know that they used to park on Bay Ocean at Memaloose. And it got to the point where it was they ended up parking on the road. It's because it's so narrow is that it continued to encroach. That's why there's a lot of signs there. And this is also why Parks goes out there and provides flaggers on the busy mornings. So you'll see Parks Department and their budget, I assume their budget, they actually bring flaggers out there. And when you get to the Solly Smith, where they park is not in conflict with vehicle movements. So people have the right to park in the right of way unless it becomes a safety issue, and Solly Smith is not, and Memaloose is.
Thank you. Good
Okay,
answer.
thank you. That's a good answer. And that's one I can share back with them. Just it's not infringing on the roadway.
Okay.
So that's a good one. That makes sense.
But if I could interject,
Oh, yeah.
a good question though,
Mhm.
because it's fairly obvious to anybody driving by Solly Smith Bridge
Yeah.
during steelhead season that they're not parking there just to pull off the side of the road. They're
No.
They're parking there because they're
They're
cheap.
fishing.
paid,
Yes.
and they,
Yeah.
and by God, they're not gonna pay the,
Yep.
they're not gonna pay the $10 fee for anything, you
Yeah.
know, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Another question, Parks question, the Happy Camp Road. Apparently, so that's, I guess I didn't even realize that that was one of our parking lots, was one of our county parks parking lots down at Happy Camp. Is that Parks?
It's a little bit gray. We service the ugly turquoise concrete bathroom,
Yeah,
and we pick up the garbage there.
yeah.
So I think Chris can let us know, he's probably looking at it right now, if the road down there is a county road.
Because I was told that you could lose a car in the potholes at the Happy Camp parking lot. And since it was a county park, why were we not fixing the road there in the parking lot there?
So I know that the Happy Camp Road going down there is a county road. That parking lot, once you get off the county road and go into the parking lot, I'm actually skimming to see the ownership of that.
It's great to get
But,
out and see the Home and Garden Show.
I got COVID there.
Oh, no. Okay, well,
That-
knock on wood, so far, I think I've escaped COVID. I think
That
I think I'm
parking
okay.
lot, yeah, that parking lot is actually owned by somebody who lives in Vancouver.
Oh,
There we go.
so the parking lot is private, but the bathroom is ours?
In the parking fee order, Happy Camp beach access is under the day use area and it has a fee. So I don't know where that fits in exactly, but it's listed here as a fee.
That was the other part that was brought up, is if we own this and we're charging a fee, one, we should have somebody there enforcing the fee, as we hear everywhere that there's, parking. There should be more signs, it should be enforced, and it should be fixed. So it sounds like there's kind of just a
Yeah.
weird confusion, maybe.
Yeah, I'll dig into it a little bit more. I don't know if we have an Iron Ranger there and people are voluntarily paying fees. I'm not sure about that. But I'm assuming that the reason, if we charge a fee, the reason would be that just to recoup the money that it costs us to pick up the trash and clean the bathroom. Because I'm guessing that that bathroom doesn't belong to us either.
Good question for Danny when he gets
Yeah.
here, right? We'll put Danny on it when he
Happy camp.
gets here. We've got something for you to do a little research on.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a question. And then the other question, Nate Tarts, we have our dock which is the boat launch, which is open to everybody. And then there's that secondary dock. So someone said they understood that it had been purchased by local community members for private use. But they didn't know for sure if that was true or if that secondary dock was also a park dock.
I don't know about that.
Where is that? That's only-
Neatarts,
Oh,
Tarts
Neatarts.
boat.
at Neatarts Boat Launch. So, you have the main boat launch and then there's, kind of what is a little, I don't know, it's not a marina and it's it's been jettied that creates that. And then there's that second dock. And there are people that saying it's a private dock and they've paid for it and other people saying it's a public dock.
I don't
Rachel, do
anything
you
about
know?
that.
The
Chris?
ownership, they're right by each other.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
yeah.
The ownership of all the property, and it even jets out into the water, it's county. That's not to say that there's not some arrangement where somebody owns a dock, but it is county ownership.
We're talking about side by side.
No, if I can't,
Yeah.
I'm a terrible artist. Oh, thank you. Yes, because you have the regular boat dock and then it's like there's a little, I'm gonna call it a marina area.
Property.
That's all county. So that other dock inside there is theoretically also county?
No,
I could
No.
throw it on the screen
I'm saying the
Yeah.
dock
if I can get
extends
permission to
from
share.
county property and the dock extends from county property out into the water. And like with a lot of tax lots around water, the tax lot goes out into the water. So the dock is within the county tax lot, but I wouldn't assume that that means the county owns it because we have lots of unique arrangements.
Okay.
We may or may not, just because
How would we find out what the arrangement is? I mean, is there a recorded something?
maybe. Yeah, I would start with the clerk's office, but I guess I would want to maybe dig in with the community members who maybe know that or who reached out to you as a starting point as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Or there might be something in the parks files. I might have something in my files.
Yeah, and then the others were a couple of local access road questions, Chris, but I don't have the names of them in front of me, so I will call you on that.
Sure. I am in a bridge conference next week, and I'm presenting to ODOT Bridge the part of the week following. So I'll be
Okay.
out of office for a little bit.
Are you around the rest of this week for a quick phone call one day?
I am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, those were the big questions at the Home and Garden Show. In case anybody wants to know what's on people's minds, roads, parks, property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Doug?
Well, I'll just do a couple, I'll ask, Chris, I haven't asked him about this for a while. Are there anything, new on the big trout situation and ODOT? Is that, and of course, the rivers are lower now and they'll be low probably for some time, but, is that moving forward or is it stalled?
You're muted.
I think I learned my lesson. We're stalled at the moment. We're going to submit this to FEMA to see if I can claim it in the January presidentially declared disaster. It's a little bit of a reach, but we don't know if you don't get if you don't ask.
Right.
We are putting together another alternative to, and actually I need to call the engineer on that one, and that's the one I plan on submitting to ODOT to see if I can move them a little bit. Currently, ODOT will pay to put in a temporary bridge, remove the old bridge, and remove the temporary bridge, which doesn't do us a lot of good because we still have 2 people back there. Our new alternative, normally when you design bridges, you do your best not to impact anybody. Well, can't really avoid it. We said, let's take the blinders off how we would normally do it. Let's put the bridge downstream from where it was. And if the bridge design takes out the guy's house, he wants to be bought out. That solves that problem. The bridge gets there, we take out a guy's house. The other gal that's back there would prefer to stay, is not going to object to being bought out, but she would have access with the new bridge. So at that point, our match would still be probably around $360,000 for a bridge that goes to one house, but it's still cheaper than a lot of our other bridges that go to a single house, such as Legler and such as some of our other, the Prince Bridge, etc.
Wow.
Well, I guess they don't have that problem in Arizona because there are no rivers or something like that. Boy, so one more, the Cape Coando project, I'll ask Rachel as I go by there every day, and looks to me like they're making substantial progress. There's a lot of smooth finished area curbs. Are they tracking okay? Are they ahead of schedule, or can you say?
I don't have a final or a true updated schedule yet. I'll know more tomorrow at our construction meeting, but they are definitely gaining on the schedule because we allowed them to close the parking lot. So that's great. And yes, we're finally starting to see all the above ground work because there's been so much underground since the project started. So that's been exciting to see. And they are scheduled to start paving the week of May 12th. So
that's all good.
yes, that's all good.
That's good. Well, it just,
Yep.
with that, I haven't even walked around there, but I slow down and look at it. And like I said, there are a lot of finished areas. And when they get to that point where you can actually see the grade and the fine finish, they're ready to do something.
Yep.
So,
Yep, the stormwater system is in. They're working on the finishing up the utilities and the restrooms all constructed, finalizing the roof, the interior utilities, finishes. They're doing the final grading to allow for the paving. Most of the flat work around the perimeter sidewalks, all that is in. I think they were finishing Cape Coando Drive this week. So yeah, they're cruising along. And they should start opening, again, I'll know more tomorrow. They should start opening the parking lot back up, at least on the north side, the first week of May.
good.
And then I'm not sure how they're going to transition that with the gravel and the paving, but.
Well,
I could
good. I'm glad
piggyback
to
on
see
that. So piggyback on that, the road and driveway is contracted to do the paving in the parking lot we've reached out to them and they will be giving us a quote to do Webb Park Road in that little piece of area that is in pretty poor shape. And then Circle Drive, we just installed some drain up there and reshaped the road. So we're getting a quote to do that type of work. And if we don't succeed, we're thinking a pretty good quote because all the paving equipment is going to be right across the street. And if that doesn't happen, county will go out there and pave a portion of Circle Drive and Webb Park Road. So I know
Great.
those two are of interest for the community.
Thank you. I appreciate the update.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Rachel, anything for you? Bill, anything?
Thank you.
All right. Anybody online for the good of the order
We're in the back of the room.
or in the back of the room? Thanks for being with us in person. All right. Well, if not, we will adjourn at 3:56. Thank you, everyone.